Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. I'm your host, Jess Dewell. You are listening to Start from the Beginning. Our panel today is not only geographically diverse and culturally diverse, they come from completely different industries with completely different backgrounds and completely different approaches to the world. So when you hear the answers to the question today, which is, when we get a bright idea, we expect to see the results right away from our actions and our initial excitement. Why is it important to start at the beginning, and what is the first step? Yeah, they knew ahead of time it was a twofer, that there were two questions in that one question. So I'm going to introduce you to Joel Dawson, who was born and raised in South Louisiana. He is the epitome of the American dream, going from homeless and contemplating suicide to author, business owner, and in 2016 ranked one of the top 20 speakers in the world. He says, the world doesn't owe you anything, nor will it give it to you, but everything you want is there, provided you're willing to work hard. And Greg Jameson, our other panelist today, is the author of The Influencer Effect, Insider Tips for Gearing Up Your Online Success, that provides business owners with the formula that they need to become successful online. He brings 20 plus years of technical development experience, including web dev, custom web programming, and retail and wholesale e-commerce solutions and internet marketing to clients. Right after this, you will meet them in person.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
When we get a bright idea, Greg, what is the first step and why is it important to start at the beginning?
You actually have to look at what the end is before you start at the beginning. If you look and say, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, then you can start to plan out the steps in order to get to where it is that you want to go with whatever that bright idea is. So once you have those steps planned out, then you can kind of go back to the beginning and create a plan and look through all of those steps that it's going to take to get to that final goal. And when you do that, you can sit there and start to chunk things out and say, okay, at the very beginning, I know I need to do this, and then I need to do that, and whatever the steps are leading up to that final goal. And when you do that, one of the things that is really important is to be consistent. So you might have this big goal, and everybody I know likes to think, okay, I want to get to the end of this thing and I want to accomplish this. But any big goal is usually accomplished through a bunch of small steps and being consistent over a period of time. And therefore, planning that out at the beginning, you can say, these are the things that I need to do a little bit at a time, this every day, this every week, this every month, however long it's going to take you to get to it. So the whole planning process and then going back and starting at the beginning, I think, is what's important.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. All right, Joel.
Yes.
When you have a bright idea, what's the first step and why is it important to start at the beginning?
Well, I deal with a lot of entrepreneurs that they come up with this great idea that's going to make them billions and billions and billions of dollars. Okay. And the first thing I have to do is say, wait, hold on. It's just an idea. It's just an idea. So the first thing that you have to do, I'm going to cover this in three simple steps. The first thing that I would suggest someone do, now, whether it's a marketing idea, an idea for a business or anything like that, the first thing that you do is you say, well, okay, I'm going to write this down. This is the way I think it's going to work. This is, the people that I think are going to be affected by it, maybe interested in it or whatever, but you basically write down, how do you think it's going to work? Okay, that's step number one. Step number two is you have to, before you do anything, determine what has to happen in order for this to be considered a success. Don't just start spending billions and billions and billions of dollars because you already know that you're going to make all of this money. No. The third thing is you have to test it. get a sample of your market of who you think are going to benefit from your idea. And that's the part that you start testing. As Greg said, if you work backwards, you know what has to happen in order for this to be successful. Then you can actually lay out a game plan. So the first thing would be just to, write down how do you think it's going to work. Decide on what has to happen in order for it to be considered successful or profitable. And number 3, just test it and let the data talk. Let the data do the talking after all of that. And you make your decision as to whether this is a good idea or just scrap it and find another one.
We're trying to get a spectrum. And what I love is we have 2 people from 2 very different backgrounds, 2 different geographical locations. And in this case, they have not met yet before today. And they're still thinking along the same lines. So we've got to be onto something. Everybody who's listening, we must be onto something. Let's start with this. Begin with the end in mind, looking at the end first. Where do you want to end up? And dig into that a little bit more. How do you know a bright idea is worth even going through the steps that you both described?
I personally think that if people look at you like you're nuts, then you probably have something that's going on. It's like, okay, you think I'm crazy. But if you've thought through the whole process and can kind of see it yourself and say, I know that this is going to work, even though people think I'm crazy for attempting it, then you're probably onto something big. If everybody's just looks at you like, oh yeah, well, of course type thing, then it's probably so commonplace that it's not really going to have as big of an impact as an idea where people look at you like you're off your rocker when you get started.
If you go back, and it's not that long ago, where you had these 2 brothers, right? They had this idea that they were going to fly a plane. They were going to make a plane. They were going to fly like birds. Just imagine the neighbors just sitting there. Hey, look, there they go again. There they go. Crash. See, now that's commonplace. That's commonplace now. But they come in at times, they would just gather their buddies together. Hey, watch these 2 brothers there. They're sitting there drinking beer, watching these guys. They crash again. Until that one time, they took off and they flew like birds. So, just like Greg was saying, don't worry about what anybody else says. But if you test your idea, you want to gather data, not opinions or testimony to look for people to say, okay, I think this is a great idea. And I'm going to use the startup, since I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that, they come up with these ideas. Before you spend a lot of money in it, you have to make sure, first of all, that it works. Okay, especially if it's an invention or something. And you want to go out to the community just to get a basic understanding of if this is a perfect fit. There's Eric Rice wrote a book called The Lean Startup. And there's a quote that he says, people spend money developing these expensive products that nobody wants to buy. Okay, so before you do anything, make sure that number 1, it works. Number 2, that people are willing to pay you for it.
One of the things that you both talked about was around the idea of external criticism. How are you going to do that? That didn't work for me, so it's not going to work for you. What are you actually thinking? I guess I'll sit back and I'll watch you fail.
It depends a little bit upon if you have backers, financial backers or not, and if they're the ones that are giving you the criticism. If you are figuring out how to do this yourself, I would say that for the most part, external criticism, ignore it. If you take a look at Apple Computer when Steve Jobs was running it, he would come up with these ideas, and the ideas were not necessarily things that people were asking for, but instead things that he thought people would want. He obviously got a lot of external criticism, even though it was a public company. It was just like, we're going to do this type thing. And because he believed so strongly in it, he was able to pull that off. And I think that that's the big thing that you have to do as an entrepreneur, is just say, you know what, I really believe in this. And you listen to the criticisms, but you don't necessarily act on the criticisms.
This is what I get. Hey, I want to talk to you about this idea, or I want to talk to you about that idea. And the one thing that I ask them, I says, why did you choose this person? Or why did you choose that person? Well, I respect this person out. Let's just use technology, for example. Somebody has this app that they develop, And, well, I want to go talk to my mom about this. So I'm going to talk to my dad, but yeah, I think this is a great idea. And they tell you, you know what, you shouldn't do that. What you should do is stay in school or whatever. And they listen to them. And I say, well, if you have this new technology, this idea, why did you ask your dad, who's a plumber, and your mom, who's a nurse? And I explained to them, and because this is where a lot of things fall apart with the criticism, because people take it to heart, you never really asked them for their advice. What you were looking for was acceptance. When it comes to something like this, you have your idea, not only do you have to not listen to what they're saying and believe in your process, like Greg said, you really have to believe in yourself. If there's nobody else on this planet that believes in you, you have to believe in you. And if you believe in yourself and you believe in what you're doing and you believe that this can help hundreds, thousands, or millions of people, then that's all you really need. Because as I said, I was joking earlier about the Wright brothers, but nobody believed in them, but they believed in themselves. And that's all that it took. And right now I can go from where I am right now in South Louisiana, I can fly to Denver, Colorado to a women's conference to listen to you speak.
That would be awesome. Oh, okay. I'm listening, and here's what's coming up, because I hear you say these words, and I can take them at face value until I'm in the middle of it. And let me tell you, okay, so I'll share this story. This is not necessarily like a female version of this, but this is just how I process this. I look to the external to get inspiration and information and decide how much, and I pull energy from that. And then I bring it inside and I'm like, cool, I've got energy. And now I can create and bring something out into the world. Knowing that process, that criticism, that external criticism from my nurse mom or my plumber dad, which they have other jobs, but we'll stick with that for easiness here. And people that I know, people who I talk to who have tried similar things, and they tell me, even if it's just an attempt to show support, wow, that's going to be hard. That's not actually what they say. There's usually a whole bunch of other words around it that they mean, wow, that's going to be hard. And there's some, there's some doubt, there's some, it didn't work for me. There's all this other stuff that happens. And when I get enough of that, you know what I do? I actually get to the end of my day and I sit down and I cry. And I cry and I cry. And I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Why am I actually doing this? Is it really worth it? And when I'm done, doesn't matter. Usually it's the end of the day. Sometimes I don't make it to lunchtime and I'm already crying on the floor in these situations. Is that, do I have the confidence to continue? Do I have what it takes to give it all to take that next step regardless? And in the end, so far, every single time that has happened, the answer is yes. I find the courage, the confidence, and I have the ability to say, okay, this is hard. And I'm going to own the hard, and I'm feeling the hard, and I'm not sure what to do about it all. And for me, I think part of the crying is to just let it go and to get it out of my purview so that I can keep going. And it might be different for some people. I mean, it might be anger. It might be withdrawal. It might be procrastination. It might be, who knows what it is, but recognizing that and then being able to face it and go, wow, now what? Now what do I do? Now, am I going to take that step forward? And so it makes me think about this too, in the middle. So if we're in the middle of this and we're creating and we're doing all of this wonderful stuff in relationship to our ability to take this idea from an idea, go through the steps and get it to completion. When we don't think about it enough up front, what happens?
I sit down and I cry. And sometimes I don't make it to lunch.
You are a good listener, Joel.
No, I'm telling the truth. No, I'm just...
Kind of going back to what Joel was saying about believing in yourself, I just have to tell you the story. When I had my first software company, I don't know that anybody necessarily believed in me, including my parents. I had asked them if they wanted to invest in a type thing, and they were like, no, we're going to pass. And a few years later, I actually had a reseller out in Washington, D.C. that had taken out a radio ad for my software, and my parents were living there at the time. And my dad heard this radio ad come on for my software, and he was like, I about drove off the road. You know, going back to the thing about believing in yourself. And if you're sitting there listening to all that external criticism and stuff, maybe you do need a good cry now and then.
Have a pillow fight, who knows?
You got to release things in one form or a fashion. It might be that you do get mad at people. It might be that you go sulk or whatever. But I think sometimes that introspection is actually good for you.
Well, I tell you one thing, for me, it was the exact opposite. So this is the first time we're opposite, Greg.
I know, I was like, you and I are going to be best friends before this thing's done here.
I know, right? And the reason I say it's opposite was because when I was young, in my younger days, I always took everybody's advice. I did. And I never really struck out on my own because people said, well, that's not a good idea. This is what you need to do. So I took their advice early on, and that didn't work for me. It didn't. So when Jess knows my story, from me going from being homeless and actually starting an insurance company and a crack hotel. I didn't care what anybody said because I had already gave them that opportunity. Yeah, I listened to you already, and it didn't work for me. Now I'm going to do what I want to do regardless of how it comes out. I don't care. This is what I want to do. And I always had the belief that I can do it. It's just that before, I always listened to what everybody else said.
Whether we're doing something different, whether we're shedding whatever we need to get rid of, whether we're persevering regardless. And what I would say is we get up every day and put on our lipstick. And I understand that doesn't necessarily work for everybody. Nonetheless, we're in this process. All of a sudden, we're moving towards something, and there's this gigantic obstacle, this problem that was unexpected. And it's not necessarily that we didn't think about it at the beginning. It's still unexpected. And a lot of times there's this buzzword right now that's still pretty buzzy called pivot. Let's just pivot. And that frustrates me. I don't know if it frustrates you guys, but it frustrates me because to me, a pivot is a gigantic thing. It's not a shift. It's not an adjustment. It's not an incremental change to see if we can get different results and stay on the original path. It's well, that had to be bad, so let's turn some amount of degrees away from that. And well, now you know my opinion, so I'm going to ask you. When this comes up, what's your take on what to do next to face this almost or perceived or real insurmountable obstacle problem?
The first time you and I had an interview, it was the Just Got Plus You show.
That was.
And at that time, I had just started my speaking career. This was 2000. God, that was a long time ago. That was like
a lot. We've known each other a long time, Joel.
Yeah, I know. It's like 2014.
Yeah.
And if you remember, we did the sectional nonverbal communication.
Yes.
Remember that? Okay. I cannot tell you how much research, how much time I spent making that my platform to launch my speaking career. Mm-hmm. Guess what? It flopped. It flopped because whether I was not able to present it in a valuable way to people, maybe I wasn't able to create the urgency or whatever, the bank account was still zero from that effort. So I was like, okay, so here I go. I left my insurance company, totally let that go. All this time that I spent doing this, guess what? It's not working. So what am I going to do right now? So I knew I had to do something. Pivot. I didn't know it was called pivot then, but I knew that I had to find another way to generate income. And what I did was I just started just doing different types of speaking in the community. And I found something that was where there was already a demand there. They just needed someone to fill it. The good thing is that landed me my biggest contract today with the federal government. So that worked out really well. But I think that had I just kind of stopped and said, oh, it's over, because that happens a lot. People say, okay, this is the end of the world. My idea didn't work. Versus understanding what a pivot is, however many degrees you got to turn, and just keep trucking, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about a pivot is that it may in fact be necessary to step back and look at things. But if we kind of go back to what we were talking about before about listening to other people, one of the things that I think that we have to do is say, okay, we shouldn't listen to other people that have never been through what we're trying to do. But what we should do is go and find people that have been through something similar to what we've done, and that be able to call on them as mentors and say, look, I've got these problems right now and they look like they're insurmountable problems. You've been through a similar situation. How can you give me some advice where I can go in and really structure my problems so that I can get through this in the easiest way possible? So even though we were saying before, don't listen to outside input, I think when it comes to things like that, that you have to really say, I need to get some outside input and determine if this is in fact something where I'm not taking my eye off the goal, I'm just changing my methods to get there.
Preach, Greg, preach.
Yes.
I told you, you and I are going to be best friends here by this time we're done here.
What I heard each of you say was, on one side, we've got to know when to stop and it's actually done, to be able to do something different and take advantage of a potentially different opportunity. And then on the other side is, how do we know that it's really flopped until we take more steps to find out if we're closer to the other side than we ever thought possible and we're giving up or changing direction too soon?
If it's a new idea that is uncommon, you have to make that determination, not based on what anybody else tells you, not based on that. You have to say, let the data talk for you. Do all of the research that you possibly can. And, you should, if you have a sample of your audience or whatever, be able to gather enough data to where you can make a determination that if I continue forward, hey, this is going to work. I can, make money at this. Or, based on, the way I thought, if I can't tweak, pivot, and it still become profitable, you have to give it up. Now, the part that I cut off when I was talking earlier is when I do talk to entrepreneurs, especially sales. Sales is a great one. One of the best ways that you can get started in sales and be successful, guarantee your success, it's been around for hundreds of years, and it's just something called modeling, where you find somebody that's done what it is that you want to do, and they're very successful at it. Don't get out there in the bushes, start chopping down trees, trying to create a road. Find somebody that's extremely successful at what it is that you want to do. Ask them to be your mentor. Buy them lunch. Do whatever it takes, because that's going to save you in the long run. And just ask them for a plan, and the way you do that is very simple. As I said, buy them lunch. And because I did this, bought the guy lunch, and he said, well, this is what you do, this, which is totally nothing that I would have done, but I didn't know this. So I went back to him and I said, this is what I understood you to say. This is what I did. Will you give me another session in 3 months? And he said, yes.
Okay, so this external data, specifically looking for perspective or dimension, comes into play to, one, potentially be a sanity check, two, to learn from others' mistakes so that we don't have to go through the same mistakes, and three, to maybe even help us prioritize and be able to find out ahead of time before we're spent, are we willing to do what it takes?
Yes, exactly.
Maybe it's not even external doubt. Maybe it's just, I'm tired. Maybe it's just, I had no idea that I didn't know I was going to need this much energy. And then self-doubt starts creeping in. How do you find inspiration and combat self-doubt?
Especially if you're just starting out and this is your first business. And I want everybody just think about the very first time you struck out on your own. There's no possible way you can actually think that it was going to be that much work. I know I didn't. And I remember being at that point, it's like, man, is this worth it? Can I really do this? I really focused on, why did I make this decision in the first place? Well, first of all, is this the worst thing that you've ever been through? No, it was not the worst thing I've ever been through. So, and I got really focused on, why did I want to do this in the first place? Okay, what was that going to give me? Whether money, time, what's the money and time going to give you? More fulfillment in your life. Okay, so is it more fulfillment in your life? Is that worth the work? Not necessarily the money, but what that money is going to get you. Is that worth it? And I said, yes. But I mean, I didn't just jump up. I was sitting down crying. I was using a lot of 4-letter words that meant, and when you see like the hashtag, the question mark, all this stuff just fly out your mouth, or you just go beep, 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 beep. It takes a while to pick yourself up, but you have to go back to, yes, I can do this. I can really do this. And you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Joel said there that's really critical is asking yourself the question about why you got into your business in the first place. That's absolutely huge. Because if that is a big enough motivator, I did it to gain freedom. I did it to change the world, whatever your reasons are. If that's a big enough motivator, then you'll get over your pity party pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple of other actually really actionable things that you can do to help you get over your pity party. One is simply step back away from it for a little bit. Go on a bike ride, a run, go skiing, whatever it is that you might want to do. Go get some physical exercise, and that usually helps clear the thought process up a whole lot. And the other thing that you can do is go find a bunch of other like-minded entrepreneurs and start a mastermind. Do a little bit of a brain dump on them and let them brain dump on you, and you'll find that usually there's an answer to what it is that you're looking for.
You guys have little tokens. I have little things scattered around that make me smile, that remind me that there are people who have no idea what I'm going through. And even if they did, they would still root me on, right? One of them is this little guy. Check this out. For those of you who are listening, this is a little dragon. His name is Falcor. Do you guys remember what movie Falcor is from? It's from The Never-Ending Story.
I knew it.
You knew it?
Because I'm thinking the big white thing, I never could tell if that was actually a dragon or a dog or...
Yes, he's a luck dragon. He looks like a dog. That's exactly right.
My kids used to watch that. That used to freak me out.
It's a scary show. I mean, it's scary. And if you think about it, it fits here because whether we're talking about pivoting, whether we're talking about self-doubt, whether we're talking about having to pick ourselves up again, all of that stuff comes out in that movie from every single character that you have. Well, except for Falcor. He's just always smiling and laughing and saves the day. But all of the main characters, the kid reading the story, the main Atreyu who's on the journey, even each of the people that Atreyu meets along the way, what's happening in their own life when they think nobody's watching. I mean, all that stuff matters. And so I don't recommend watching The Never-Ending Story if you're kind of on a pity party scenario. might not do you the work, but ahead of time, I mean, like right now, we're thinking about this and being able to go back and go, wow, adversity is not unique to just me. And yes, this is my unique journey. And I do have somebody I could reach out to, I can learn from, I can reflect on, whether it's a movie, whether it's a person, whether it's whether it's somebody you can seek out as a mentor. So these are all fantastic and great examples, both of you. This is the voice of Bold Business Radio. You are listening to program 140, Start from the Beginning, where we have our panelists, Joel Dawson and Greg Jameson. We are talking about the importance of looking with the end in mind, right? We're also talking about the importance of all the stuff that people don't really tell you along the way that you're going to encounter. And you're probably, if you're thinking about this and you're the high of an idea and you're continuing to go forward, you're probably like, oh, whatever. Well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to subscribe at iTunes, iHeartRadio, wherever podcasts are sold, and that you are listening to your podcasts, and save this program. Save this program because you're going to want Falcor, or you're going to want the ideas of the self-reflection and how do you pick yourself back up again and how are you building confidence at some point down the road. And we're moving into this conversation, and we were talking, whether it's a good luck charm, whether, some people probably pray, some people might sing. I really liked what you were saying, Greg, about taking a break. I'm not sure a few hours would always do the trick. Maybe a vacation, like go get out of Dodge. And none of us are in Dodge, so that doesn't make any sense, but you get the point. And so what if we start back up on this conversation and we think about, we've got to draw from our experience here. And so somewhere along your journey, you heard somebody speak, you saw something in media, you read something in a book that changed your perspective and like multiplied your confidence level in your own capability by thousands, if not millions of %. And I would love for you to share what that resource is so that we may benefit from it as well.
You're talking about that moment when the lights, when that switch just happened, that changes everything. And for me, that happened in 2011, and I had, for about a year and a half, I had been homeless. And, this one particular night, I don't want to go through the whole book or anything, but to me, it was that moment there. And it was probably because I decided not to jump, that I reclaimed my life and I made a decision. It was an emotional decision, because decisions that happen under emotion can happen like that. Nobody has to talk you into it. You don't need anybody's advice. You don't need anybody's blessing or anything. You're just going to do it. So it was at that point for me that where the light bulb just basically clicked, and I said, this is what I'm going to do this.
I've got a little bit different story than I think many entrepreneurs do, in that I have always been an entrepreneur. Other than jobs when I was a teenager working through high school and college, I've never really worked for anybody else. And therefore, kind of having this epiphany of, I'm going to give up my cubicle and go start a business. I've always done that. But within the businesses, I think one of the things that I have seen is that once I've put a product out there, if all of a sudden people are like lining up to come see it, then I know that, hey, I'm really on to something here. I've had other products where I have actually launched them and tried to sell them, and no one bought them at all. Kind of going back to the pity party thing. Like, well, I just put a bunch of time, energy, and resources into this, and no one cared except me. You definitely have to let the data talk, as Joelle was saying. But I think that, this epiphany of inspiration is, in many ways, for me, it has come from the customers when they look at something that I've put out there and they're like, yeah, we really can get behind this thing. Then you get this feeling of, okay, I know I'm onto something, and you really take it forward from there.
Everybody who's in their 20s thinks they're invincible. I just turned 40 and I still think I'm invincible. And I'm thinking about this. People always tell me I'm mortal and I better just get used to it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not quite ready for that yet. Have you guys found out your mortality? Like, oh my gosh, there is actually something outside of my control here that I have to pay attention to, that sometimes shows up, whether we're on a high or a low, to kind of shows its face and goes, oh, I got to remember, I've got a human body, however I describe myself in this human body, I've got this body, and I got to take care of it too.
My schedule, up at 5 a.m., I'm at the gym every single day, but every day I get out of the bed, I still make those old grunts and stuff like this, trying to get out. It happens. It happens.
Being an entrepreneur is something where you have lots of highs and lots of lows. If you are just going to work for the man, you're getting a paycheck every 2 weeks or whatever it is. Life is fairly steady. But when you're an entrepreneur, you definitely experience highs and lows. And the older you get, I think if you start to see some of those lows, you definitely feel like, hey, I'm mortal and I better come up with something really good here soon.
Think back to a time when you had a great idea, and you may have already talked about it in some capacity in this conversation, and you may not have. What are the thoughts, the emotions? How does the world look around you when you know that this is the next thing you're going to do, and so you better start thinking about it?
It's exciting. It's scary. Probably more scary than exciting. But as an entrepreneur, you understand that. So one thing that we've been talking about, since we first started the show was, you really have to believe in yourself. And as I said, it's going to be terrifying. It's going to be exciting, and it can just not work. But you have to get started. You have to make, one of the first things that Greg said was, you have to lay out a plan. Lay out the plan and just work the plan. Plan your work and work your plan.
I know that when I have a new idea, it just possesses me. It's like, that's the only thing I think about. And whether I'm trying to take some time off or whatever, trying to go to sleep or whatever, I'm thinking about that new thing all the time. So that's when I know that it's like, hey, this thing is so powerful. I know it's going to help everybody, that you're just running down the field full speed ahead because it possesses you at that point.
Both of you guys, you're like, start with the end in mind. And Greg, you were saying work backwards. And, and Joelle, you were talking about figure it all out so you've got some data to make a decision. And I'm thinking, it's out there. It's possessed me. I'm excited about it. And I'm more terrified than I ever have been before. I guess I'm going to go for that. I guess I'm going to go for that. More terrified than ever before. And knowing that I've got the picture at the end. And for me, I don't mind thinking up front, going, okay, so what are the things what's the worst that can happen? And I'm pretty high level. What's the worst that can happen? What's the best that can happen? What are the skills that I need to know to make this happen? And then as I start taking action, the plan makes itself clear to me. And I have some concept of knowing if I'm on the right track based off of those inadvertent milestones that come out of it. So that's like one way of approaching an idea. So people who are listening and you're saying, hey, have a plan. I'm like, I'm with you people. A plan is good. I start from a vision. and then those, some of us though, right? And then I take action to figure out what that plan is, the steps that must be taken. Other people might have that vision, and then they're like, okay, so I need to know this checklist goes with this task, which goes with this milestone, and it has to be all set out. So all somebody has to do is check, success, achieve, problem solve, right? Whatever it is that comes up that they can go around. And there's a third one. There's the third one, which I think is kind of the hardest, where we can start with either a checklist or we can start with some sort of an action to move us forward. Yet every single time we do that, our vision gets bigger. This concept that in technology, they call it scope creep. And I'm not sure what they call it in other industries, but it's the best descriptor ever. The more we do, the bigger the vision gets. And sometimes that can be a problem too. So each of those ways has their own inherent problems and challenges that we face as being in a human body, yet we can go forward and we can create what we need in our work style. And for me, I'm surrounded by people who like checklists and who like data and who will follow up and who will be like, so we're doing all of these things. What about that? Do you have somebody that you use to poke holes in your ideas, that you use to run concepts and numbers and results by, to make sure that as head in the clouds or work style that you might have or way that you lead is less likely to throw up unknowns?
Basically, a plan does not have to be a set of handcuffs. It is a plan. It is a way of getting to where you want to go. It's not saying that everything in this plan is cast in concrete. Things may change. And again, I remember when my dad built his retirement house, that he sat down with the contractor right up front and he said, I know that we have a set of blueprints here and that this is the plan, but guess what? I'm going to be here every day, not because I'm looking over your shoulder, but because of the fact that the plan may not make my vision happen for what's going on in a certain place. And that, like, I know in his bathroom, for example, that he changed the shower as they were building it because it was like, that's not what I'm envisioning. And you need to be fluid with your plans regardless of what you're doing. You know, you were asking the question about, do you have somebody that pokes holes in it? I think that the plan itself may poke holes in it as you're going along, and you just have to sit there and go, this is the direction that I want to go, but I need to change some things here to really get to the vision that I was looking at in the first place.
So create your own feedback loops and data checkpoints. I hear that. That's cool.
When you have an idea that you're trying to bring into this vision, it's never going to be exactly like you anticipated going to be. It never is, because the one thing that you talked about, Jess, was, you know, the unpredictables, things that we don't know are going to happen, that we've never planned for. So, but as long as you're making progress forward towards that vision, you're going to be okay. It's not, don't even tell yourself that it's going to be a straight line, just smooth sailing, because it's not. You're going to run into some trees like from sliding down this mountain. You know, it's going to happen. But you have to be okay with it and know that it's about the journey to get to this vision. Yes, we're going to, you know, make some changes here. Yes, we're going to make some changes there. And the same thing as far as pivoting, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not. Just because it didn't, you can still get to your destination, still get this vision it may start off all nice and pretty, playing and stuff with the colors and graphs. No, it's gonna look like a big scratch paper where you've been markers, erasers, and all this kind of stuff on it. But as long as you get there, that's what matters.
Our time together is coming to a close, which I wish it wouldn't, because this is an amazing conversation and there are different ways we could take this and dive into additional stories. I want to know why it's bold. Why is it bold to start at the beginning?
The most important thing is you have to get started. And that's what terrifies a lot of people. So just by you taking that initial step, that's bold. If you don't take any other steps, because everybody wants to get ready, they got to have all of these questions asked. No, you don't. You just have to get started. Plain and simple, cut, dry, take one step.
You may know Joe Saba, Jess, I don't know, but he's got this saying that says, you don't have to be great to get started. You just have to get started to be great. And wow. I think that's exactly what Joelle was saying there. Is you got to get going. And by starting, that is a bold step. You know, you can't get to the end if you don't start. So
yeah, that's the most difficult one, the first one. That's the bold one.
Yeah.
Today's program, number 140, Start from the Beginning. You will find the program notes at the usual location, voiceofboldbusiness.com/P140. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 140. You may also search the website for Start from the Beginning. It's important that we're having the dialogues that we have, that we're sharing the stories that we have, that we understand not only the positive side of things, the less glamorous, the less magnificent side of things, specifically because we are not alone in our experiences or our feelings. We are, however, an outcome and a product of what we choose to do and how we choose to use those experiences. Joelle and Greg shared their answers about why it's important, the boldness of starting from the beginning. And we talked a lot about the roller coaster along the way. So add your voice. It's through that. Whether it's a hashtag VBB radio, whether it's reviewing the show, whether it's subscribing on your preferred listening platform where podcasts are sold, this is how we define what being a leader means today. What I want you to take away from this, what Joelle and Greg, and I will speak on their behalf here, want you to take away from this is that the first step is important. And so make sure that you practice and always find the confidence to take the first step and start from the beginning.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.